Hey there, welcome on. Jessie Mundell here. We are gonna do a pretty key topic today, one that I've been getting flooded with questions on over the last week because I've been talking a bit more about diastasis recti recently. So today I wanted to talk about 3 key tips for an accurate diastasis recti assessment and where I tend to see things going wrong. So where the assessment might not be so accurate, or where clients report back to me that they are unable to tell what's going on, or they're unsure if they did it correctly, or if a client sends in video feedback and I could just tweak some things if I was there in person for them with that assessment. So I hope that this is a relevant topic to you, whether you are in pregnancy right now, whether you are a mom, or you are a fitness or health professional who is also working with clients and assessing diastasis, or getting the courage and the confidence to be able to do accurate diastasis assessments. So welcome on, everybody. My name is Jessie Mundell. I am a pre and postnatal fitness specialist. I work with moms, pregnant and current, who are all over the world, online based, and they are mostly doing strength training based exercise as the makeup of their workout routine or programs. And then we talk a lot about abdominal and pelvic floor type health as well. So that is me. I'm really hoping the kiddo, the toddler who is supposed to be napping, is currently walking around her crib with a blanket over her head and has taken off her clothes. So you know what? This is just how it goes in my life over the last couple of years. Anytime I try to do one of these at nap time, it is just always taking a chance. So we'll see how it goes. But I think this will be pretty quick today, because just 3 fast tips. If you have questions as we go through, definitely let me know. And say hi if you are here and on live. I love seeing you post your comments and your questions as they come in. Okay, so tip number 1. Remember, all these tips are to get an accurate diastasis recti assessment. There is really, truly not a lot to be gained from a diastasis recti assessment that is not accurate and is not as consistent over the time period that we are assessing. So it's typically not that we do one assessment and we leave it at that. With my clients, the moms that I work with postpartum, we are doing a series of assessments to see the progress that is being made over a period of time. Typically, it's from whenever in that first 2 to 3 week postpartum mark that they're doing their first diastasis recti assessment, and then they're repeating it every 2 weeks until they're somewhere in the 8 to 10 weeks postpartum range to see what's happened. And that is where so much good information can be found. So we need to ensure that those assessments that we are doing on our clients or patients or on ourselves are accurate, so we know if things are working in our core pelvic floor rehab routine, in our exercise routine, in the workouts that we're doing. We need to know if things are moving in the right direction, or are we causing harm in some way. So tip number 1. When you do the assessment, when someone lifts the head up into that little crunch movement, when we have the fingers on the belly, when someone is lifting their head up off the floor, when you are lifting your head up off the floor, I want you to ensure that it is a head lift and that it is not a full-blown crunch. It is not a sit-up, it is a head lift. So this is often where things can go wrong right from the get-go, because sometimes people will lift up way too far off the floor. So how I cue it is to tuck the chin towards the chest and slowly lift up off the floor. And usually people will do that. They'll come back down and I'll say, okay, let's do that again. But even less, even slower, about half that speed and about half that amount lifting up off the floor. So even slower and even less, because I want to be feeling, say these are my fingers pressing into someone's abdominal wall. I want to be feeling that hug of the abdominal muscles as soon as possible. So at the very first moment that I feel that hug on the fingers, I'm getting someone to stop lifting their head. Usually for a lot of people, it's just millimeters, centimeters up off the floor, where you can start feeling some action through that abdominal wall, and that's good. Interesting to have them lift up a little bit more and then come back down and then pulse there, or come way up and all the way down and do it again. But where we want the information to be gained, and where we want to take those notes, so again, we can see the progression as we take assessments further down the road, is from that very first instance when someone is lifting their head up, so we can stay as accurate as possible in the assessments to come. A biggie that tends to happen with people who are assessing themselves, they'll lift their head way off the floor, shoulders up off the floor, and they will say they have a 1 centimeter or 1 finger gap when they feel like they're at the top of that crunch. So I don't really need to know what's happening at the very top of that crunch. Again, interesting information, but I want to know what's happening at the bottom when they just start to lift the head. Okay, so tip number 1, it is a head lift. It is not a crunch. Have your client or your patient lift their head up even less and even slower on each of those assessments. Sound good? Okay. Tip number 2 for an accurate diastasis recti assessment: start with more fingers, your fingers, pressing on your own belly or on someone else's. Start with more fingers than less. So I always start with at least 3 fingers wide across someone's belly. Not 1, not 2. I want at least 3, especially if I'm assessing someone earlier postpartum, because oftentimes it is wide. Oftentimes it is 3 to 4 fingers in those early weeks postpartum. Sometimes it's less, but oftentimes it can be more. And sometimes when I'm assessing someone, when you're assessing someone, it will be more than 3 fingers. So I just think that it is, you're going to feel more, you're going to get a more accurate representation of maybe how wide that abdominal muscle belly gap is when you start with more fingers. I like my clients to do this too, because oftentimes they can better feel what's happening. If they only start with 1 or 2 fingers, they might just not feel that hug of the abdominal bellies at all, because the gap is wider. So if they start with 3, sometimes we just have a better chance of them being able to feel that on their own body. Okay, so start with at least 3 fingers wide, and then you can adjust from there. But start with more than you think you might need right off the bat. That's tip number 2. Tip number 3 in diastasis recti assessment: I encourage you to assess someone, assess yourself, without any thought, without any conscious thought of connecting to your body, and then again with conscious thought and connecting to your body. What I mean by this is, I'll have someone lie down to assess them. I will walk my fingers down the midline of the belly. I'll go back just above their belly button, and I'll say, okay, whenever you're ready, just chin tuck, slow head lift. Let's see what we find. And they do that. And we'll assess then above the belly button and also below the belly button. We'll write our notes down from there. Next step, we teach them how to do a connection breath. If you have the Core Plus Floor Restore program, or if you've worked with me, this is often what I call the Core Plus Floor connection breath for short. And this is how we learn to connect to the pelvic floor, that lifting and lowering with our inhale and our exhale breath. Julie Weeb would refer to this as piston breathing. I call it a connection breath because simply for me, it just makes a bit more sense in my brain. Just we're connecting to the pelvic floor on our exhale breath. And connecting to the pelvic floor simply means lifting the pelvic floor up a notch. If you think about getting into an elevator, you hit the button, you go up, that's basically what's happening. Our exhale breath is hitting the button, perineum feeling lifting upwards towards the crown of the head is that lift of the pelvic floor. So I would assess someone for their diastasis without any connection to their breath, and then I would assess someone with connection breath and lifting their pelvic floor. Because the difference in sensation of what you are going to be feeling in their belly on their abdominal wall is usually very different. When we do that connection breath and head lift and we're assessing fingers into the belly, you're going to feel typically, a lot of the time, more tautness or tension back against your fingers. It's not going to be, or hopefully, and we can cue this, to be a bulging out, but it's simply going to be this tautness. It's going to feel more firm rather than feeling more squishy. It's also typically a bit easier to feel on somebody's to feel the gap of those abdominal muscle bellies. Sometimes it just feels like it completely flattens out, so it could be different for different people, but the actual connective tissue, what your fingers are pressing into between that abdominal wall gap, is going to feel different on a lot of bodies when they are doing their connection breath, lifting the pelvic floor on the exhale, and then doing the head lift. So take notes on both of those measurements again, and continue to do that through all of your assessments over the next month, 6 weeks, so you can see what is happening and what is changing on all those different points without breath and then with breath, to see if they are able to create more tautness and tension in the connective tissue, linea alba, when breath and connection to the pelvic floor is added in. Does that make sense? Okay. So, does anybody have any questions right now about diastasis recti assessment? I will post a link below this video with a free guide that we just released on how to do an accurate diastasis assessment, and it will give you the assessment tracker that we use to make those notes, video footage of me assessing on my friend Dr. Jillian Sawyer, and just some other goodies in there that can help you understand how to best assess for diastasis. But those are my 3 tips for getting an accurate assessment, okay? So let's repeat super quick. Tip number 1, head lift, chin tuck, slow and steady on the head lift, not into a full crunch. Start with more fingers than you would think for assessment is tip number 2. Don't start with 1 or 2. I would go 3 at least. And then measure with the connection breath and without the connection breath to see what the difference is there. Sound good? Ashley says, helpful, never thought to check with engagement to keep track. Yeah, I love that. Jessica says, I think I have been overdoing it, taking my assessment at the top of the crunch. Does that mean it's inaccurate? You know what? It's accurate for that position that you're lifting into, but I would encourage you to try again, lower down on the floor. Head closer to the floor just to see what happens. It's interesting. Often the gap will feel wider down there, and again, that's totally fine. It's totally fine to have that gap between the abdominals and for it to remain there too. But yeah, let's repeat that assessment, Jessica. Lower to the floor to see if there's any difference from there, and there might not be, but there might be too. Anything else? Those are my 3 tips for accurate diastasis assessment. Check the link below that I'm going to post for a free guide to help you in your diastasis assessment on yourself or with your clients. And all these tips should help you along the way to getting that accurate assessment, so you really know what's going on and just how things are changing. This 2-year-olds, y'all, everything's out of her crib, just doing headstands. Okay, friends, I think that is everything that I'm seeing coming in. So tag me if you need more questions, if you're catching the replay. Let me know if you need any more help, okay? I will chat with you later.